Hello, my name's Margaret Malpass and I'm delighted to be able to offer this webinar for you. I do hope you enjoy listening to it and looking at these screens. I've been asked to speak about success factors for dyslexic adults, and the example I'm going to use today of one of those success factors is creativity. So a little while ago I started doing some research into what happened to adults and how did they become successful? And here's a short breakdown on that research. 68 dyslexic adults completed a free-form mock questionnaire. I was able to talk to those adults because most of them I managed to find through different BDA or local association activities. And I also carried out 15 very in-depth interviews, taking a couple of hours for each one. The questions asked about what had been their success factors, what had enabled them to have successes in life, and also what their challenges were. Now, I had been warned by a couple of academics who had looked at the questionnaires that I was using in advance for me, and I was very grateful to them. But they warned me that because I had made the questions very open, it might be very, very difficult for me to analyse those questions and answers when they came back. But in practice, I discovered the answers were incredibly consistent. And one of the interesting findings was that only 9% said their education contributed to their success, yet 72% listed the strengths that arose from their dyslexia, which led to their success. So the questions I wanted to answer with this research were as follows. Why do so many dyslexic people have problems in our education system, and yet many of them do go on to do really well in life? How is it possible? And then secondly, if we can find out those factors, and then can we replicate them for others so that other people who are dyslexic can also follow this pathway for success? So here are the findings on the factors for success. 56% said that their success was due to determination. 23% said it was down to empathy, and another 23% said it was down to their intelligence or a particular ability they had. 19% said they were motivated by helping others. 19% said they had a supportive family, which also included at work potentially a supportive boss. And 14% said they had worked very hard, which actually is quite interesting if you also look at the answers for determination. So determination and hard work are actually coming out as being the most critical factor here. And as I said earlier, only 9% said they had an effective education, and 6% put down their success in life to wit. Now, a word about this success. I didn't want to tell people what I thought their success was or what defined success. They all chose their own version of success in terms of where their lives have been successful. And there were very few people in this sample who didn't say they had successes in lives, which was tremendously uplifting. So if you prefer to see things visually, then here's a pie chart showing what we're talking about. You can see just how important determination is there, and empathy and a supportive family. And then I asked a question about, does your dyslexia convey strengths? And as we mentioned, 65% said yes. But interestingly, 72% of the respondents actually went on to list strengths. So that included some who actually hadn't said that their dyslexia conveyed strengths. Nonetheless, very, very large proportion said yes, they had strengths. And these were the strengths. 44% said seeing the big picture, seeing life or a thing in life, and you can see the whole lot in one sort of screenshot of it. 30% said atypical problem solving. 26% said empathy, which they put down to having been in a difficult situation at school from a very early age had led to their growth of their empathy with others who were struggling. 21% said determination. 9% said seeing things in data patterns. So seeing patterns in large quantities of information or being able to see in 3D for network drawings and so on is a particular strength that is often talked about, and sure enough, this group also said that this had helped them with their success. Another 9% said inspiring others had helped them, and 2% said making the best use of their coping strategies had led to their successes. And here again, if you prefer it visually, there is a bar graph to show you the same information but presented as a picture. So I wanted to be able to describe from the research the 10 traits, 10 factors for successful dyslexic adults, and I wanted to find a way of actually helping to remember it. So I wrote this mnemonic. The initial letters are the letters that go with the success factors. So this is just keeping you slightly in hesitation about what they're going to be. So dyslexic adults can succeed through nurturing excellent ideas and conquering many problems, which I think is a very good way of actually describing the end of it. But the D, the A, the C and the S and so on all represent the 10 traits. And here are those 10 traits. Now, the way in which I'd approached this was there were about 8 pieces of significant research from the past that had been done into different aspects of dyslexic people's lives and whether or not they were fulfilled and whether they had made a success of it. And what I did was to pull this together in terms of putting information into the questionnaire. So there's 8 pieces of fairly sizable populations that research had been done on. And what I found was that there were these 10 traits which had not been pulled together previously. Nobody had actually taken the different pieces of research and said, there is a pattern emerging here. And some of this too had emerged from the research I did and was a little bit new. So here are the 10 traits. Determination is probably the most important one to start with, and it's certainly seen as being the most important determinant for success in life generally, or success in any venture, whether you're dyslexic or not. People have to be determined to get to success. Having sufficient self-esteem, it doesn't have to be, really, really masses and masses of self-esteem, but somebody has to have some to be able to get going. Having a passion for something was something that came up over and over again. And often what the people I interviewed and those doing the questionnaires tell me was having a passion for something actually led to them having the patience and the determination to learn to read text sufficiently. Finding your niche in life can be completely transformative for young adults, and it certainly makes a big difference if you can find somewhere where you can work or live successfully. Then the rest of it seems to follow. The skills of atypical problem solving and creativity are linked, and these are definitely 2 features of the dyslexic brain, which I'm going to talk about in a little while, that are definitely strengths relating to this kind of neurodiversity, and they are absolutely some of the traits for success for dyslexics. Empathy, we've mentioned earlier, the ability to stand in somebody else's shoes and understand what they're going through, is a very, very useful skill, and it does seem to be one that comes around through the experience of being dyslexic. It may not actually be a strength arising directly from the genetic activities in the brain, but it certainly seems to follow from the experience from a young age of actually finding things difficult around you. Many people talked about their verbal influencing, probably developed because if you're not so good at putting things into text, then you're probably going to need to use speech. And many dyslexic people are particularly good at telling stories, using metaphor, and generally being able to influence through words. Having fluency in coping strategies is very important. And I think that's an area that we could do more with, because whilst many individuals, particularly at school or at university now, do have help in terms of personal strategies like knowing how to revise, knowing how to manage time and so on, and also the use of assistive technology, you really want to get to the stage where you can do as well with text reading software as you would if you were a completely fluent reader. And that is something I think that could be enhanced even further from where we are currently. And finally, the 10th trait for success was support from others, which generally means support from family, usually a parent, when the child is young. And then later we'll go into a particular teacher, for example, helping at school, could be a specialist teacher. And then into work, where we're looking at things like mentors or colleagues who are particularly supportive, or potentially line managers who are aware of dyslexia and can actually play a very, very critical role. So those are 10 traits for success. And now I'm going to pick just one of those traits and look at it in a lot more detail. And I've chosen creativity because it's often quoted as a strength conferred by dyslexia. But it's been a bit of a conundrum, and there's been quite a lot of dissent over this, saying there's no particular reason why creativity should be a strength related to dyslexia. And when academics have tried to do some research on it, they've actually found it's been very difficult to prove the links. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this, and one of them could be actually that the construction of the research activity might be looking at artistic kind of creativity rather than looking at creative thinking. And what I began to see through this research was it was definitely about having a very creative thought pattern in the brain, as we'll see in a little while. Now, Nicola Brunswick at Middlesex University, her team, not very long ago, identified spatial awareness in their research and drew some connections between that and creativity, which was interesting. We also know the incidence of dyslexia is much higher in students studying art than the sciences. The issue with that, though, is it because dyslexic people are choosing to go into the arts rather than sciences because they're going to find perhaps the work a bit more easy to actually produce the kind of assignments that are needed, sort of more portfolio-based, less text to write, and so on. That's certainly going to be one of the reasons, but it might not be the only one. And then, as I mentioned, there has been a few research studies which have tried to see if there's a connection between the practice of art and dyslexia, so things like drawing and sculpture and so on, and they haven't drawn any correlation at all between being dyslexic and being able to do that kind of artwork. So I think it was actually worth looking at creativity and creatives and seeing where dyslexia fitted in. So this is the creative process. We know that cultivating ideas and being creative is a process, and there seem to be 3 possible variations to this. First, they're simply putting together and combining things that we knew already. So if you think about cooking, it could be that we know that bacon and egg and tomato goes well together, and we know that tomato and avocado are quite good together. So perhaps it's just being creative with a cookery menu, thinking, oh, if I put bacon, egg, avocado and tomato together, that should really work. Then secondly, there are bringing things we know together, but seeing them in a completely new relationship to each other. So you quite often see that with the use of technology. You might be using a particular type of technology in one area of your life, and you think, well, actually, that's going to really work if I do that over here. Or if we think in terms of business activities, learning about things like, say, marketing a particular product, and then you go to work in a new organization, you think, I was doing that in that previous job, but actually it's going to really work in this job too, but in a slightly different way. And then finally, learning something completely new to us and connecting that with what we know already. Then we can look at how we produce ideas. And it's, again, a process. We collect information for the brain to work on. We then do something with that information. We manipulate it within the brain. And that enables us, through the processes that we've looked at just now in the previous slide, of either bringing things together that are very much the same that we knew about already, or bringing something into a new context, or bringing something completely new into what we know already. And that allows us to produce the aha moment, a completely new thought, a completely new concept. And that's the moment of creativity. And then what we need to do with our production of ideas is to evaluate them. Now, this activity is known as divergent thinking, which the dyslexic brain is really good at, coming up with lots and lots of different ideas. What it's not quite so good at is convergent thinking, that is, choosing the best solution. But the great news about that is that that's just a skill and can be quite easily developed. So, what do creative people tend to be like? They are curious and adventurous. They are willing to take risks. They are said to be persistent and determined. They are passionate and potentially compulsive over their particular interest. They're often resilient to criticism from others, so they have sufficient self-esteem. They're unconventional. They're tolerant of disorder. They are often self-taught and not successful in education systems. Now, I didn't write that. That actually came from some other work specifically about creative people. What I also noticed from that particular research was that most of the people they quoted about it were actually dyslexic. And if you look at those descriptions, they're almost exactly the same as the things that I discovered were the 10 factors for success, but within the dyslexic arena. However, creative success doesn't just happen. What became very apparent from doing this research was that it would seem that the brains of dyslexic people have latent talents. But talent is there as something you are potentially born with, or it comes along to you when you're quite young. And the talent can stay dormant unless you do something with it. It has to actually be worked upon, practiced, and so on. So one might have a talent for painting, but until you've actually spent hours and hours learning how to paint a tree or a person or whatever, actually that talent isn't going to show very much. It's not going to actually come out in a practical way because you have to have the practice. And it's exactly that you see for creative success. It doesn't just happen. For really big breakthroughs, the creative thinker has to have an extreme interest in their topic, and they have to spend many, many hours thinking about it, and they become an expert. For example, Edison, who invented the light bulb, his team had 1,000 failures en route. And incidentally, Edison was dyslexic, and he was told by teachers he was too stupid to learn anything. You can see this time and time again if you look at Watson and Crick in terms of the analysis of DNA. They worked at it for many, many years along with their female partner of the group too, and eventually they found success, but it had taken years and years and years before they actually got anywhere, because the truth is you don't find a very fast breakthrough in this concept until you've done a lot of work in the area. So all the research shows that creative success takes hard work, revision, going over things. Failure is seen as part of the route to success. When you fail, if you work out why you failed, you suddenly find a glimmer about what you've got to do slightly differently in order to move on and be a success. It takes extensive knowledge and it takes persistence. If you've ever played a sport like golf or tennis or rugby or any other sport, you will know that success in those fields requires just this: hard work, working on what you're getting wrong and changing it, extensive knowledge about the game, and then being very persistent and practice and practice and practice to get success. And so that was the results of the research I did. But what did BDA do as a consequence of this? Well, the first thing is that we disseminated the findings at national and local level. We got lots of information out there, and there was considerable interest in it. I also wrote an e-learning program based on the 10 factors that were for individuals to follow through for their own development. Now, two things about this. One is, I mentioned earlier that having a creative brain produces divergent thinking, but in order to choose the right solution, you have to have convergent thinking, and in fact that is a skill that can be learned. That is an example of the kind of thing that is in the e-learning program. So it takes each area and actually shows an individual exactly how to develop things like determination, how to keep going, how to remain motivated, how to build your self-esteem, how to find your niche in life, how to find a passion, find out where your passions lie, and so on. And each of those areas is built into this e-learning program. And the second very good piece of news is that that e-learning program is going to be offered for free throughout Dyslexia Awareness Week. Normally, it is charged at $12.99, which is actually still very, very cheap for something of this length, because it's about 120 hours of learning in total to do the whole program. But obviously you don't have to do it all in one go, and you can pace yourself and you can do it over 6 or 8 months if you wish. But normally say it's £12.99, but for Dyslexia Awareness Week, the BDA is offering it for free. And the way to get to it is to go to the website and go to training, and you will find it under the menu that is drop-down menu partway through the training site of the website, and you'll be able to identify it there, and you can get in touch with the training department if you wish by through email to training@bdadyslexia.org.uk and ask them if you can have access to the programme. So that was another thing that we did, and the third thing, we used the ideas for from this research to develop our strategy. So for example, because we knew that it was really important to have support, that individuals found support really valuable, we started then to write the specific programs for mentoring for dyslexics and also the toolkit for how to develop internal networks. Incidentally, if you are interested in learning more about that, then I'm also doing a second webinar for Dyslexia Awareness Week about networks and how to build them. The consequence of doing all this research was that I realised this was actually going to be very suitable for a book, and Jessica Kingsley's publishers were interested to publish it and did so in February 2017. It has become one of their bestsellers in this area and has now been published across all the English-speaking part of the world. So it's been sold in America and Australia and New Zealand and so on, Hong Kong, Singapore, you name it, which is wonderful news because it's getting the message out to other dyslexic people that actually follow this kind of blueprint for 10 factors, build us up, and success is pretty much guaranteed for you. So before I finish, I just wanted to talk a little tiny bit about the BDA in case you don't know them and what we're doing and so on, and then a little bit about things that are going on at the moment. So the BDA is the largest and foremost charity in the area of dyslexia and specific learning difficulties in the UK. It spends quite a lot of its activities on campaigning for a dyslexia-friendly world, and we do this in many different ways, in Parliament, in consultation events, in local services and so on. There is always something going on in this particular area, and just to give you some of those results in terms of positive change, there have been lots of reasonable adjustments put into exams across lots of different areas, so GCSEs and A-levels are the obvious ones, but also into exams for medics, for doctors, exams for music. So Royal College of Music and Trinity College both have now incorporated reasonable adjustments in their exams for dyslexic people as a direct consequence of the work that the BDA has done with them. We also work quite regularly with the DVLA on driving tests, and every time a different change comes up, then we're there making sure that it is a reasonable activity for dyslexics, and if not, about how something can be done differently. And we've also worked with Access to Work, who implement workplace needs assessments for those with disabilities, to ensure that they have awareness of dyslexia and make reasonable adjustments when people are telephoning them to get their assessments organised under that government scheme. And those are just a couple of examples, but it's going on all the time. And then the BDA also runs services. So these include things like the free national helpline, which answers many, many questions and emails every day. There's a provision of online resources, many of which are free, which I would urge you to have a look at on the BDA website. Do a bit of digging around and find things. Things like, for example, the resources that came out of the Dyslexio, that's an dyslex.io project that was funded by the DFE last year and the year before. There were some wonderful cartoons and films and so on that can be really, really helpful, particularly for increasing awareness in different environments. And then in terms of paid for things, the BDA organises diagnosis through diagnostic assessments. It organises workplace needs assessments using specialist dyslexia assessors. It has a very big offering on training. It produces publications such as books and articles and so on. And it also deals with the accreditation of courses for specialist teachers and the accreditation of specialist teachers itself. And of course, it's a membership organisation, so one of the things that is very helpful is if you join as a member. And just a quick idea before I finish of some of the BDA events that go on. I would advise you to go to the website for the latest news, but there are webinars throughout Dyslexia Awareness Week, of which this is one, but there are more. And they offer webinars quite frequently. Every month or so there'll be a different topic taken that you can join in with. BDA also organises 3 to 4 conferences a year, and the next one coming up is one on neurodiversity in relation to specific learning difficulties, which is being held in London on the 9th of November. There is a gala dinner on the 30th of November at Drapers Hall, and in the gala dinner we celebrate the extraordinary achievements of dyslexic individuals and also a nominated teacher who's been put forward by dyslexic young people. And there's also opportunities to have fun. If you look at the fundraising events, there are all sorts of things about challenging yourself with walks, whilst potentially still generating some funding, which pays for the campaign work that is done at BDA. Thank you for listening to this question of this webinar. If it has left you with any questions, then by all means send them to the helpline at bdadyslexia.org.uk, and if you put the header on it, post-webinar inquiry, it will find its way to me, and it means that I can give you an answer, as this is being a recorded webinar rather than live. And I'd be most pleased to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time today, and goodbye.